You've probably underestimated yourself for years. Most genuinely sharp people do, and the
I
reason you
think I
can't
see
see
what
your
I've
own
been
intelligence
missing.
is actually one of its strongest signs, because real intelligence rarely feels like intelligence from the inside. It feels like doubt. It feels like
I
taking
think I
longer than
figured it
everyone else
out.
to speak.
Here's my
It feels
idea.
like watching a room instead of dominating it. It
Look at
feels like second-guessing an idea you already know is right. It feels most of the
I need
time
that
like being
report
quietly
urgently.
unsure. And that
Something just
experience,
feels
that
off.
constant low hum of maybe
I
I'm
can't
missing
shake this
something,
feeling
is
I'm
not the
overlooking
absence of
something
intelligence.
important.
It is the fingerprint of it. The loudest people in any room are rarely the sharpest. The sharpest people are usually the ones still checking their own work. So today we're going to walk through the quiet signs that you're far smarter than you've been led to believe. Not the obvious ones, not test scores, not vocabulary, not the ability to sound clever at dinner. The hidden ones, the ones the research actually points to and the ones most people carry without ever realizing what they mean. If a few of these feel uncomfortably familiar, that discomfort is your answer. The first quiet sign is that you constantly doubt how smart you are, especially in the rooms where you're clearly holding your own. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger described a pattern that most people have heard of but few have really understood. The less someone knows about a subject, the more confident they tend to be because they don't yet know what they don't know. The more someone knows, the more they see the edges of their own understanding, and the more cautious they become. So the very sensation you interpret as "I'm probably not that smart" is often the exact sensation produced by knowing enough to see how much is still unknown. From the outside, it looks like insecurity. On the inside, it looks like insecurity. On the inside, it's calibration. And the next sign is even more counterintuitive than that. Sign 2. You think slowly on purpose, and you've been made to feel slightly ashamed of it. In a culture that rewards the fastest hand up, taking a beat before you answer looks like hesitation. But cognitive researchers who study reasoning draw a clear line between fast automatic thinking and slow deliberate thinking. Fast thinking is efficient, but it inherits every bias you've ever absorbed. Slow thinking is where nuance lives. It's where you notice the second-order consequence, the unstated assumption, the thing everyone else skipped past. What reads to others as being a step behind is often you being a step deeper. The pause isn't a lack of processing, it's more processing. And once you see this in yourself, the next sign starts to make painful sense. Sign 3. You keep quiet in group conversations, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have too much to say and too little certainty about which piece is worth saying. You listen for the shape of a discussion before you enter it. You track who's said what, what's been assumed, what's been ignored. This kind of contextual listening is closely tied to what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple frames at once instead of clinging to one. Loud contributors often speak from a single frame. You're weighing several. From the outside, silence looks like disengagement. From the inside, it's the sound of a mind working harder than the room realizes. And the next one is where a lot of quietly brilliant people finally recognize themselves. Sign 4, you notice things other people don't seem to notice at all. Small shifts in tone, a phrase that doesn't quite match the face saying it, the exact moment a room's energy changes. Social psychologists sometimes call this thin slicing, the ability to extract meaningful patterns from very short exposures. It's not paranoia and it's not overthinking, even though you may have been told it is. It's a form of pattern recognition running on very small units of data, microexpressions, verbal choices, silences. If you often walk out of a meeting knowing something was off before anyone confirms it, that is not anxiety. That is intelligence doing what intelligence does when no one's watching. And it feeds directly into the next sign. Sign 5, you ask questions that make people slightly uncomfortable, and you can't always understand why. Not aggressive questions, not gotcha questions, just questions that go one layer beneath what was said. What do you mean by that? Compared to what? How would we know if we were wrong? These aren't difficult questions. They're clarifying ones. But clarifying questions expose vagueness, and vagueness is where a lot of confident people hide. The philosopher's habit of asking what a word really means, or the scientist's habit of asking how a claim could be tested. Both live in ordinary people who never got the label. If you've ever been told you're too intense for asking something perfectly reasonable, you may not be intense. You may just be precise in a world that isn't. And precision, as you'll see in the next sign, tends to come with a cost. Sign 6, you replay your own conversations afterward, sometimes for hours, and you edit them in your head. Most people assume this is a sign of anxiety. It can be, but it is also very often the signature of a mind that treats communication like a craft. You care about being accurately understood. You care about the difference between what you meant and what you actually said. You notice when a sentence landed a hair off from where you aimed it. This is the same instinct that makes good writers rewrite, good therapists reflect, good negotiators review the tape. What you experience as overthinking is often just the internal quality control. Most people simply don't run, and it connects to something even quieter. Sign 7, you get bored faster than people around you and you feel guilty about it. A meeting that could have been an email, a conversation that circles the same 3 points, a show that telegraphs its ending in the first 10 minutes. You disengage and you assume that's a flaw of character. It usually isn't. In psychology, boredom is often described as the mind's signal that the current environment isn't offering enough new information to justify sustained attention. Sharper minds hit that threshold sooner because they extract patterns faster. Once you've seen the pattern, the room stops giving you anything to work with. From the outside, this looks like impatience or arrogance. From the inside, it's a brain that finished the puzzle early and has nowhere to put itself. And that restlessness leads directly into the next sign. Sign 8. You have an unusually wide range of interests and you've been told more than once that you should just pick one. You read across fields. You start with one topic and follow the thread into 3 others. You know a strange amount about beekeeping or medieval trade routes or the history of a specific instrument for no professional reason at all. This is sometimes called a scanner mind, and it's closely related to what researchers describe as high openness to experience, one of the most consistent correlates of measured intelligence. The world rewards specialists loudly and generalists quietly, so you may have grown up believing your wide curiosity was weakness. It is not. It is often the raw material of original thinking, because original ideas usually live at the seam between 2 fields no one thought to connect. And that seam finding brings us to the next one. Sign 9, you're strangely good at explaining complicated things to people who feel intimidated by them, not by talking down, by translating. You find the analogy, the everyday example, the one image that makes a stranger's face relax. Physicist Richard Feynman argued that if you can't explain something simply, you don't truly understand it. The reverse is also true. The ability to simplify without distorting is one of the clearest markers of deep comprehension. If people quietly seek you out when they don't understand something at work, that isn't a coincidence. That's your intelligence being recognized by others long before you recognize it in yourself. And the next sign is one people almost never associate with being smart. Sign 10. You change your mind more often than the people around you, and you've sometimes been called inconsistent for it. But updating your view when new evidence arrives is not a weakness of conviction. It's the entire mechanic of learning. Rigid thinkers protect their opinions like territory. Flexible thinkers treat opinions as drafts. Psychologists studying reasoning consistently find that the willingness to revise a belief in light as better information tracks with higher intelligence, not lower. The people who never change their minds aren't strong, they're just stuck. If you call yourself saying, actually, I've been thinking about that differently lately, you're doing the thing most minds refuse to do. And that flexibility sets up the next sign beautifully. Sign 11, you feel a strange, almost physical discomfort around dishonesty, even small, socially accepted dishonesty. The pleasantry that isn't quite true. The compliment that doesn't match the face giving it. The story that keeps shifting shape. You register the mismatch instantly, and it lodges somewhere in your chest. This isn't moral superiority. It's a sensitivity to inconsistency, and inconsistency is exactly what a pattern-oriented mind is built to detect. What feels to you like being too sensitive to fakeness is really a high-resolution truth detector running in the background of every interaction. You don't need to prove it to anyone. Your body already knows. And the next sign, in a way, is the shadow side of this one. Sign 12, you find small talk genuinely exhausting, but you can talk for hours about something that actually matters to you. This has been misread your whole life as being antisocial or shy or difficult. It usually isn't any of those. It's a mind that runs on meaning rather than maintenance. Small talk is designed to be low information, low risk, low depth, a social lubricant. That's a legitimate function, but it doesn't feed a mind that's hungry for pattern and substance. Once a conversation turns into something real, an idea, a memory, a genuine question, the same person who's seen withdrawn suddenly becomes the most alive person in the room. If that switch is familiar to you, take it seriously. It's telling you what your mind was built for. And that leads us to one of the deepest signs of all. Sign 13, you often feel like you're not quite from the same planet as the people around you, and you've been carrying that quietly for years. Not in an arrogant way. In a lonely way, you laugh at the timing of a joke, a beat before others do. You care about a detail no one else seems to care about. You get moved by something on a Tuesday afternoon that everyone else walked past. Psychologists sometimes describe this quiet mismatch as the burden of a mind that processes at a different resolution than its environment. It doesn't make you better than anyone, it just makes you different in a specific, describable way. And once you have language for it, that lifelong feeling of why do I see this and no one else does, stops being a defect and starts being a signature. Which brings us to the part most people never hear. What's interesting is how consistently every one of these signs gets misread by other people and by the very person carrying them. Doubt gets read as weakness when it's actually calibration. Slowness gets read as dullness when it's actually depth. Silence gets read as absence when it's actually processing. Sensitivity gets read as fragility when it's actually resolution. Curiosity gets read as scattered when it's actually range. Changing your mind gets read as flaky when it's actually growth. And underneath all of it, the same pattern keeps repeating. Real intelligence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to win the room. It's usually sitting slightly to the side of the room, noticing what the room is doing, which is why so many genuinely smart people spend so many years convinced they're not. They compare their inside, full of doubts, revisions, second guesses, to everyone else's outside, which is edited for confidence, and they lose that comparison every single time. But once you understand what the research actually shows, that comparison collapses. The confidence you were envying was often just the absence of self-examination. The certainty you were measuring yourself against was often just a smaller map. The people who never doubted themselves weren't ahead of you. They just weren't checking. If more than a few of these signs felt uncomfortably like a mirror, that recognition is not flattery. That's data. Your mind has been telling you what it is for a long time, in a language you may have been trained to ignore. I'd genuinely like to know which of these felt the most like you. Tell me in the comments. I read every reply, and the patterns in what people share are half the reason this channel exists. If this one landed, there's another video on this channel about the traits of people who think differently from everyone around them, and it pairs almost perfectly with what we just walked through. Watch that one next. It will keep this thread going. And if you want more of this one hidden pattern of the mind, gently decoded every week, subscribe and turn on notifications so the next one actually reaches you. That's the whole promise of Think Rarer, and it only works if you're there when the next piece drops. Because here's the quiet truth most people never get told about their own mind. The reason you couldn't see your intelligence was never that it wasn't there. It was that intelligence, when it's real, spends most of its life looking in the mirror and asking if it's enough. And that question, the one you've been carrying like a flaw, was the answer the whole time.